Hello, Nashville. How you doing? Thank you. Somebody actually, my friend's out there, she dressed me up. I'd like to start off with a quick show of hands. How many of you would consider yourselves to be storytellers? Awesome. Excellent. I can see a few. Well, my name is Kiran Singh Sirah. I'm the president of the International Storytelling Center based in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And in my line of work, I'm inundated with stories all day, every day, and I love it. I believe passionately in the power that stories and storytelling can bring peace, tolerance, and understanding to our world. And plus, they're a pretty good way to spend an evening. And by the way, I want to say in my professional opinion, you are all storytellers. And why do I say that? I overheard you over the lunch break. Actually, I began my work with the International Storytelling Center in 2013, but my organization started over 40 years ago when a local high school teacher decided he wanted to save a dying mountain town. So he created an annual storytelling event that he boldly called the National Storytelling Festival. Now, that was a pretty fancy name for something that was literally 60 people gathered around a wagon. As you can believe it, hay bales were the stages, but there was enough magic there to spark a movement, and something my predecessor likes to call a storytelling revolution. A storytelling revolution. It kind of has a ring to it, doesn't it? Well, around the same time, there were less quaint revolutions going on in other parts of the world, and one of them involved my family. My parents at the time were living in Uganda, and in the summer of 1972, 1 year before the first festival in Jonesboro, and 4 years before I was born, there was an announcement on Ugandan public radio by the then dictator Idi Amin. And he declared that all Ugandan Asians had 3 months to leave the country or they'll all be executed. That meant around 50,000 people, including my family, had to leave the country. Many fled the borders. My family left for Britain. They couldn't carry much, but what they could carry was taken from them by robbers en route to the airport. But despite the fact they left the tropical heat of East Africa and all their possessions behind, they eventually arrived in a small town called Eastbourne on the south coast of England in the middle of a British winter. And that's where I was born. Thank you. Now, as Ugandan refugees, my parents stood out in my home community. My father wore a bright red turban and a colorful African shirt, and my mother an even brighter red sari. Later, my dad told me about overhearing this kid tell her mom after seeing my dad, "Look, Mum, aliens!" The kind from outer space. My dad still loved to tell that story. Now, the vast majority of people were incredibly kind and welcoming to my family, but there were some that were not so welcoming. Racism existed in my community, but as a kid, that's not how you thought of it. I just remember it hard to understand why I felt so different. Home was a safe space and it was familiar, but I remember the feeling constantly on my guard every time I had to leave the house. I found it hard to concentrate in school, and sometimes I would cause trouble instead. But things started to change for me when my head teacher in weekly school assembly started to tell stories. Mr. George was an older gentleman. He was white, pretty much like everyone else around me. He wore a tweed jacket and a kind face. And he would tell us these folk and traditional stories from all over the world, and one of them still stands out to me. It was a story about a prince that gives up his worldly riches and goes out into the world with 2 objects, a cup and a toothbrush. And one day, he sees someone break a twig from a tree and chewing it to release these juices that would clean his teeth. And he realized he doesn't need his toothbrush anymore, so he threw it away. Another day, he sees someone bend down by a river and cupping their hands together in the shape of a bowl to drink the water from the river. And he realized he didn't need his cup either, so he threw that away. Listening to that story, I began to observe a world in a different way. That story not only helped to paint a picture of a world beyond what I already knew or understood, but it helped me connect to this idea that perhaps the world provides all the things that we need to live in it. That story turned my fear into hope And it helped me see the possibilities where before I seen the challenges. It helped me see my family's difficult situation, turning up in an unfamiliar country with just the clothes on their back in a new way. I began to understand myself and my world and my place in it. And I started to see the outlines of the story that I wanted to see in the world. Listening to that folktale, it felt like Mr. George was speaking directly to me. And I expect other students in different situations felt the same way. But that's the magic of a good story. Fast forward many years, and I found myself thinking about Mr. George's Prince again, when I left my job in Scotland to become a Rotary World Peace Fellow at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I more or less gave away all my possessions, and I packed what I could into 2 small suitcases, but I did pack a toothbrush. I reflected back on my parents' journey all those years back. They couldn't take their personal possessions with them, but they could take their memories and their traditions, and they found ways to keep them alive through the stories that they passed on to me. And here I was, doing the same thing. At the University of North Carolina, my focus was on social justice, folklore, and storytelling. And after I graduated, I accepted my position at the International Storytelling Center. And as I was about to move to Jonesboro, Tennessee, a friend said to me, "Be careful, that's the Bible Belt. They're going to make you a Baptist." Now, I myself am a Sikh, so I knew my friend was kidding, but I kind of knew what he meant. In my first week in Tennessee, a man, an older gentleman, called out to me from across the street. He said, "Mr. Singh, Mr. Singh." And as he came closer, I could see him wearing a badge which read, "Son of Confederate Veterans." I wasn't sure if that was a good sign, but I completely misjudged him because, to my surprise, the first thing he said to me as he put his hands together was, "Namaste, Mr. Singh. Welcome to Jonesboro." He went on to speak some words in Hindi to me and told me how I must join him the next time he goes to the Hindu temple. And still to this day, he's trying to get me to join that temple. A few weeks later, I was helping to host the 41st National Storytelling Festival. Now, it's not 60 people around some hay bales or that type of event anymore. In fact, the festival draws more than 11,000 people from across the world and across the nation, all who converge in Jonesboro for one long weekend of live performance storytelling. I heard some amazing stories that first weekend, and I've heard many more since, but one of them still stands out to me. It was evening, and I joined the crowd in one of our big circus-style big top tents to hear a master storyteller called Elizabeth Ellis. And she closed her story with a story about a difficult and divisive time in this nation's history, the Civil War. Her story was about a group of Confederate mothers that were once laying flowered wreath stones at the gravestones of their fallen sons. But when they looked over, they could see gravestones of fallen Union soldiers. In one powerful act of empathy, they decided to lay flowered wreaths at those gravestones too. In a sense, they could see the story behind the story. They could understand that those Union soldiers were the sons of women that lived far away. They could look past the day-to-day conflicts of war to recognize and to feel a connection with grieving mothers on the other side of the conflict. I looked around that evening and I could see people from all spectrums of America and abroad, people of different races and religion and ethnicities, young and old, sitting together and experiencing the moment. And what that story did for me was remind me that regardless of what's going on out there in the world, what truly matters is our humanity, the things that help us connect with one another. I could see clearly what I knew in my own heart to be true. Stories help us understand one another on a human level. Harnessing the power of storytelling to build a better world is not easy, but I believe it's an idea worth cultivating. We want to empower people all over the world to tell their stories and to listen to others, to really listen. Because when you think about it, it's an art form that you don't need special equipment, you don't need costumes, you don't need anything really. You don't even need a toothbrush or a cup because the world provides you with everything you need. In my life and in my work, I'm incredibly fortunate to work at the local level, to work with teachers, schools, and help young people connect with this country's truly remarkable cultural heritage. I get to work with healthcare providers to use story as a way for them to connect with their patients and to help foster healing. On a global level, I get to work with key collaborators and partners to help spread the storytelling revolution. Places like the Smithsonian Institution, NASA, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Google Cultural Institute, the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation, and the United Nations, and many others. We get to connect and help preserve storytelling not only as a traditional folk art, but help to further it as a contemporary practice. Doing things like digitizing years' worth of archives with our friends at the Library of Congress. We also get to connect with our global alumni of Rotary World Peace Fellows across the globe to support groups and communities everywhere, such as the indigenous people of the Amazon, to help empower marginalized people to cultivate their stories and to share them with the world. And why do we do that? We do it because stories matter. And I believe they matter a lot. I'll give you a small example. A few months back, I was asked to lead a workshop for a group of high school students in Charleston, South Carolina. It was part of a series of events aimed at fostering dialogue, healing, and community building following the tragic events that took place last year when 9 people's lives were lost at Mother Emanuel Church. I started off my workshop by asking the same question I asked all of you. How many of you consider yourselves to be storytellers? 1 or 2 hands went up, but then I asked them to describe what home meant for them, to describe their lives, their cities, what matters to them. And by the end of a 3-hour workshop, all of them had a story to tell. And for one young woman called Chankisha Drayton, she decided to tell her story at a local storytelling event a few weeks later. She did so, she explained, as a sort of response to the way that she sees black people portrayed in the news. She wanted to tell her story so people could understand her through her own words rather than somebody else's. Now, I think that's huge. The process of owning your own story and telling it in a way that makes sense to you rather than having somebody else tell that story for you. It was powerful for me as a listener to hear that story because I think peace and understanding works with the same set of principles, finding empathy and building a sense of belonging. That's part of the reason I wanted to share my story with you. I was born in England. My mother was born in Kenya. My father was born in India. My brother was born in Uganda. We are like a mini United Nations, but we're all storytellers. We keep the old traditions alive, but we're constantly finding new ones, because stories are always crossing borders. I spent the first part of my career in Scotland, and now here in the US with my own stories, and the stories I've inherited from my family. And there are many ways we can do that. Personal stories, folk tales, pieces of history, and many other forms we haven't even thought of yet. A lot of people have helped me to get to where I am today. But I owe a lot of credit to the teacher that first showed me the power of storytelling, Mr. George. In a way, I feel like I'm carrying on his work, and hopefully to a larger scale. I reconnected with him, by the way. Last year, I Googled my old elementary school because I wanted to find out about the great Mr. George. I wanted to thank him for all the things that he taught me all those years ago. And 6 months ago, I received a letter in the mail. It's from a Mr. Len George. As a kid, I never knew his first name. He's 85 years old. He remembers me. He remembers the house that I lived in. He remembers my mother. He told me how proud of me he was and the fact that he was still telling stories. And he said if I was ever back home, I should come and visit him. Well, last November, I did just that. Thank you. He greeted me at the front door of his home in Bexhill-on-Sea, a little tiny seaside town near to where I grew up. He was somewhat shorter than I remember, but then I was 9 years old when I last saw him. But he was still wearing the most beautiful, kindest face that I remembered. We spent the entire afternoon and into the evening in typical English style, drinking copious cups of tea, eating cake, and telling each other our favorite stories. I showed him Jonesboro on the map and explained how I got there. My friends, I'm here today with an important message. Each and every one of us is a storyteller. We can use our stories in big and small ways that are important. We can use our stories to connect with our friends, our families, our co-workers, and our communities. We can use our stories as a binding force whenever there's conflict in the world. We can use our stories, we can be the stories that we want to be in the world. And we can help others just by listening. Because the power of story will be with you wherever you grow. To quote my new friend in Jonesboro, namaste, and thank you all for listening.